We're live on Facebook. Restream work. Thank you, Trish. Hi, everybody. I'm Love Coach Scott Katamas, and it is Straight Talk on Friday night, September 25th. And I've got the lovely Trish, my partner in the show. And we've got a wonderful guest. Tell us about Philippe, Trish.
Well, Philippe is a really wonderful coach. I started working with him, over a year and a half ago, and he's really helped me understand my attachment style and really get out of my codependent patterning. He's been really helpful in helping me understand my story and really start living in reality without judgment of self and others.
Beautiful. Well, welcome, Philippe. I've known Philippe. We both taught at similar festivals over the years, but I haven't had a chance to really drop into your work. So I'm looking forward to learning more about your style of working. And for everybody watching, welcome. Tonight, we are tackling one of the great challenges in relationship: how not to go into unhealthy enmeshment. You know, it feels so good to merge. It feels so good to like love someone, and it just feels great. But then the more that we merge, the more intense, the more we just get into that primal, I want you, I need you all the time kind of thing, which kind of feels good for a while. For some people, it feels good for a really long time. For some people, it's like run the moment that it happens, but because we all have a different threshold of intimacy. But inevitably, if we haven't learned after merging how to pull back and create boundaries, healthy boundaries, then what started as a really fun, sexy, incredible, oh my God, you're the one type of relationship can go south. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So it would be kind of fun to just start with each of our own kind of personal histories with codependence and interdependence, and where maybe each of us has gotten lost in the past. Do either of you want to kind of share vulnerably first?
I feel like Trish has all the experience, and I feel like I've got this one little bit, and she's got the body of knowledge firsthand.
Great. I'm Trish. I'm a recovering codependent. I think that there's a lot of, I was just talking about this today with a friend. There's a couple social or systemic societal beliefs around how women should attach to men. So there's like a couple layers of this experience. And I definitely, as a young woman, subscribed to what my mom believed. And I mean, she taught me how to think, right? So what she believed and how to relate, and also in the way that society kind of tells me to rely on another person, especially in heterosexual relationships. So in this way, I totally didn't know that there was another way of living. So here I am like, okay, I'm going to lean in and I'm supposed to do the like, thing and hold on and try your best and, abandon yourself for their needs and cook, clean, and do all the, that whole gender programming thing. And as I step back from that and get to see how to be in relationship with myself first and hold that relationship as a steady pillar of self-love and meet someone there in that same place. Like that's a really powerful experience. Because I now know that there's codependency, which is what you said earlier, Philippe, it's like, it's kind of a drug. It's kind of this weird mind fuck around it. It's like, and it feels really good at first, but then it can become really crunchy and unhealthy. And then both people start building resentment, and, when needs aren't being met and unspoken boundaries are being crossed, and it can just get so messy.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'll be vulnerable. I was in a really, really super codependent enmeshed relationship from about 1995 till about 2001. And it cost me a lot. It cost me a lot. I mean, if I put a dollar figure on it, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we'll talk about the codependent triangle. I'm a classic rescuer. I literally was born on Christmas Day. I grew up with a Messiah complex. And for much of my life, I felt like my value, if I fell in love with a woman, was to improve her life or rescue her. And I got very enmeshed with a woman who was a drug addict, and thought I would rescue her. And it really was pretty funky. I mean, and like all relationships, it started off really magical and mystical, and oh my God, you're the one. But it slowly but surely got really, really, really bad. And it's one of those things where I look back at it and I should have left after a year, and instead of hanging in various stages for 6 or 7 years. And that's where it really was like that codependent thing. It's like this fantasy. My ego was that I could fix her. I could save her. I could do things that no person can do for another person. Right? And honestly, I think to a large degree, this all happened before I became a relationship coach. This happened when I was producing television. And I think to a large degree, my deep desire to really go into relationship coaching, which I did right after this relationship ended, I started kind of transitioning from Scott, the writer, director, producer, to Scott, the coach and the relationship coach, was because I learned so much of what not to do during this unhealthy relationship that I had. And so I have a lot of compassion and empathy for when I'm working with people, or even when I notice in myself that desire to merge, to really be, so deeply connected. But I also am aware now of the pitfalls and the challenges. So, and I'll talk more about that, but I do want to put the spotlight on our guest. And here we go today.
Literally is the spotlight. That's great. So thank you so much for the invitation. I feel really honored. This is our first time working together, Scott and I, and Trish was my client for a while, and I have to say, even for all the times that I've been in relationship where codependency was present, to actually explore this with Trish, and go on sort of go under the hood and really try to understand what was going on for her, really also taught me a lot. So I just want to say thank you, Trish, for. And they do call this a practice, right? It's a practice of coaching, and just like it's a practice of other in other types of skills. And as we engage with clients, we begin to better understand what's going on for them. And for me, it all started like really early on, and I think I was 17 or 18, and my experience of enmeshment and codependency was I was with my girlfriend at the time was being abused by her grandfather while we were going out, and having no idea how to engage with a relationship like this, I just sort of gave everything I had, and like we would have sex, she would freeze. Sometimes she'd call me at work, regressed at 6 years old, telling me that her grandfather wanted to get into the house, and she was scared. And she would say, "Should I let him in?" And I would say, "Fuck no." But really having no idea how to engage with this, it actually sort of primarily trained me to respond to her anxiety or her difficulties. And so now, just 2 hours ago, my wife, suddenly her tone changes, we're talking, her tone changes, and I want to drop everything I'm doing to take care of her. So when people speak of the rescuer, they're often thinking, okay, there's sort of like a high level intention of wanting to save somebody, but there's a really primal version of that I feel that got imprinted into me in this process of engaging with my first girlfriend, and then it was kind of a sort of a dry spell of codependency for a while, and then later on I had then I met my wife, and I sort of got back into that groove. It's interesting because my parents were relatively well balanced, with not being perfect, but the idea is that I don't really have a solid experience of having learned that from my parents. It seemed to have come later on. And it was its own ride, because in the process of learning to be with this girl, this first girlfriend, I also had to come to terms with my own misandry, like my own hating of men as a result of her being harmed by a grandfather. And so there was a few different trajectories. One of them was around codependency and understanding what's happening in me as I'm engaging with women who or partners who are codependent in some ways, and sort of seeing what part of me rises up to meet them and get in this dance with them. And then what happens when I try to separate myself from that, and the way that it pulls me back in. And then on top of that, sort of my relationship to men in the process of trying to understand what I'm made of and how can I not show up like these other men that I believe are dangerous. So I know that's not part of what we're talking about tonight, but that was part of my trajectory of codependency, because part of it was I was trying to fix what was going on out there with my partners, or how my partners had been sort of beaten by the system, or by manhood, by masculinity, or whatever it is my projection is, by trying to be a better man. And initially that didn't really work, because I was just trying to fix them because I didn't know any better. And over time, I learned to become a better man myself and have the integrity that I have, and kind of face the world with those qualities, which includes not giving in to codependent behavior, such as women who want me to be there to want me to fix them, or want me to be the solid base that they need, but not letting me be a regular human at the same time. So that's where I'm at right now, is I'm realizing all of these things that used to happen a lot. And now I can be with my girlfriend and I can say, okay, I understand you need me. Right now I can't be there. And this is an opportunity for you to take care of yourself. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm still here.
Beautiful. Yeah, I want to, first of all, welcome everybody who's watching. For those of you watching on Facebook, you are welcome to come into our Zoom room. We are probably going to bring a few people on a little bit later on in the Zoom room to ask questions or interact with us. Camila or any of our other love coaches watching, especially, I put the Zoom room in there. I think just for definition purposes, I'm going to pull up a little doc, that just kind of goes through the classic codependent triangle. And I want to acknowledge that I think all of us, consciously and most likely usually unconsciously, have played these different roles. And so the kind of classic example of the triangle is the victim. You know, you've got the person, you know, obviously I was trying to save my girlfriend who was a drug addict. And Philippe was trying to save his girlfriend who had this abusive person in her life. So you've got the person who's victim, who has some consciousness of, poor me, I'm helpless and I'm hopeless. Then you've got the rescuer, here I come to save the day. Remember Mighty Mouse? And that's the role I played and Philippe was describing. And of course, underneath that is this beautiful desire to care, this beautiful desire to show love and to help somebody. But we can fall into the idea that they're broken or they need to be fixed. And also there's usually a certain amount of egoic sense of I'm better than this person, I'm more evolved, I'm more this, I'm more that. Therefore, let me show you the way, let me help you. And there is usually an ego piece of that. And then the third and part of the triangle, which most people never really recognize that they're playing, is the perpetrator. And of course, the perpetrator is, you know, anyone who's victimizing our poor victim. You're bad, you're stupid, you're wrong. And the ironic thing is that victims are often experienced as perpetrators when the relationship goes south. And definitely rescuers and caretakers also are experienced by the victim as perpetrators when the relationship goes south. So this is kind of the classic triangle. And we'll get into a positive reframe a little bit later in the show, but I want to turn it back over to our gal Trish and just comment on the triangle or wherever you want to go next.
For me, the codependency lives or is defined by when one abandons one's ability to choose. Oh, something. And so that's the place where, am I still here?
Your internet is gone really, really wonky, unfortunately. Maybe try again, or try going out and coming back in, but you got a little wobbly there.
Okay, well, I'm back here.
You're back.
Okay, so for me, codependency lives or is defined by when one abandons their own sovereignty, their own truth, their ability to choose. They abandon their ability to choose, right? So if I used to see it in the codependency triangle in the way that it looks, but what I recognize is that all people, and they definitely won't admit to this, play the perpetrator role. Whether it's the caretaker who is overly caretaking and you're like, oh God, and the victim who's wanting to get their needs met. I mean, I spent years in a relationship where I really wanted that person to see me and they couldn't see me. They couldn't, and I didn't feel seen and they didn't feel seen. So there was this place where I was kind of pushing my agenda on them and they were pushing their agenda on me. And so then it becomes this weird like attachment style thing where I'm insecure and like grasping and they're anxious and like, I mean, they're avoidant and they're pulling back. And so then it just becomes this weird, like you're doing this and I'm doing this. And it just becomes this weird crunchy thing, right?
So she just used two words that I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about in a moment, which is attachment style and avoidant. And Philippe is somebody who teaches all about the science of attachment. So Philippe, why don't you just kind of, for anybody who doesn't know about the science of attachment, or as a little little refresher course, tell us about that.
Yeah, there's so attachment is based. So the way they discovered attachment styles is that they did this experiment called the strange experiment or the strange situation. I think it was John Bowlby in the 80s who noticed that if an infant was with the mother and the mother walked away and outside the room, different things would happen to the infant. And usually they were less than 12 months old, less than 10 months old. And so from these reactions, they discovered that there was a way that the baby had been developing kind of a strategy for survival. It's an adaptive strategy that quickly develops as the baby's brain comes online to try to get its needs met, even though it doesn't even know there's the baby is a baby and that it has needs, because the brain is still coming online and trying to make sense of the world. And so based on the reactions of the parent to the needs of the baby would try to develop that way of coping with what would come up. So what happens is that the baby, for the first 9 months, they're inside the womb, all their needs are met, there's never an issue. But once they're outside the womb, then there's a separation, and the parent either reacts well to the baby having needs, or the parent doesn't react well. And there's different ways the parent doesn't react well. So this causes 4 different attachment styles to come up. One of them is the secure, which is if the parent shows up with eye contact and skin-to-skin contact whenever there's a need, and the need gets resolved inside the body of the baby, whether it's pooping or burping or eating or sleeping, which has to be taught by the parent to the baby for a good while before it happens naturally. The baby develops this trust that everything is going to be okay. This is sort of basic trust of the universe. And later on in life, that trust in the universe, that trust that needs are going to get met, continues to stay in the background of this person's life. So that's the secure. For an anxious person, if the parent sort of engages with the baby in a way that's inconsistent, They show up sometimes, sometimes they don't show up. It creates this hyper awareness in the baby. The baby is trying to figure out, is my parent going to be there, or they're not going to be there when I have a need. They're not thinking of that, but that's what happens at a primal level. And so as a result, they develop an anxious attachment style, which essentially means that they're always watching for what's going on, trying to figure out whether or not their needs are going to get met. And that's called hyper awareness. And the attachment style that's related to that is anxious. Now, the other attachment style that can develop if the parent is more hands-off, they're not showing up enough, they're not giving enough skin to skin, they're not giving enough eye contact, and it's called avoidant. And so what happens is the baby has these needs, and because the parent doesn't show enough, the baby somehow at a primal level realizes that their needs are not going to get met. So they deactivate their attachment style, they deactivate their needs, they suppress their needs, and they develop a personality that basically engages with needs as if they don't exist, or that's one way of looking at it. And so as a result, they develop an attachment style that's called avoidant. So avoidant attachers don't engage with emotions as much. They're able to suppress their emotions. They're able to suppress their needs. And they're the kind of people when you say, hey, can I help you with something? They say, no, I'm good. I'm fine. Everything's okay. But really what's happening is there's a shutting down of emotions, and which then represents a shutting down of the underlying needs. Eventually the needs pop up, and by themselves, avoidant attachers can take care of themselves, but in relationship with somebody else, they have a very difficult time engaging with their feelings, their needs with somebody else in order to communicate them or hear the needs from the other person. So that's avoidant. And then the last one is the disorganized attachment style. And this usually happens, oh, that's my girlfriend walking by. That usually happens with babies who have parents who are, while the baby is trying to love their parents is hurting them sometimes, and sometimes loving them. And it really tweaks the compass of the baby in trying to understand how to best survive. So the baby ends up developing both avoidant and anxious capacities or coping mechanisms, which then gives them a better chance of survival in the face of potential physical harm, which often is not just potential, but often physical harm. Having a parent who's volatile, or a parent who's sometimes loving, sometimes harmful, really causes deep difficulty inside the nervous system. And it's only using these coping mechanisms that the baby can survive and develop some semblance of balance. Unfortunately, it also means that there's a lot of codependency around trust that shows up for the baby and eventually the child and eventually the adult. So that's the basic idea.
And so how does that, just give us a little bit more example of how that shows up now as adults? A classic anxious, a classic avoidant.
Oh, yeah. So a classic, well, okay, let's start with classic secure. Classic secure is everything's okay, but they're not faking it. They really do believe deep in their bones that everything is going to be fine. And as a result, they don't stress out about things, and they're kind of like chill. They're the people that, that you hang out with them and you just relax. There's nothing super exciting. There's nothing super boring. They're just regular people. That's a secure person. They feel like a warm bath when you hang out with them. There's a lot of goodness, but it's not super exciting. It's just there, present, and kind of engaged with life. The anxious person is always watching for what's going to go wrong. They're often there's often a lot of drama around them. There's always this sense that something is going to go wrong in their nervous system, and as a result, they're always engaging with their partners and their friends as if something's going to go wrong, which eventually sort of translates into relationships that are very volatile. They often also occur as very clingy. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? For a secure person in partnership with them, they're like, yeah, of course I love you. Of course, I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here. That eventually has the effect of potentially kind of grounding the anxious person. But for an avoidant who has a hard time engaging with needs, eventually that will erode them. So let's go to the avoidant now. For an avoidant, as I was mentioning, it looks like somebody who's great alone, doesn't have a lot of needs, doesn't really talk about their emotions, doesn't really feel all that much. Inside, the life of an avoidant can feel a little bit sort of stark and kind of lacking colors, which then causes them to engage with an anxious person because it's so bright and vivid and exciting, and it awakens their their attachment style, and it awakens their emotions. Unfortunately, it's a very difficult combination, and that's a longer story to go into, but it is one of the basis for codependent relationships. And now if we go to this disorganized attachment style, it looks often like this sort of I want you but fuck off kind of engagement, and being engaged with that person feels like that. There's a lot of fierce, there can be a lot of fierceness, there can be a lot of volatility. There's a basic lack of trust, because inside the nervous system of the disorganized person, there's always this sense that at some point the person they're engaging intimately with will harm them or hurt them. And that belief is a primal fear. And you cannot think your way out of that primal fear. You can learn to engage with it as a disorganized person. You can say, okay, I have a primal fear. And you're engaging with a person, and intellectually, or at least emotionally, emotionally, if not intellectually, you can look at this person and say, okay, this person is not attacking me. I'm still freaking out. I'm still having this primal fear arise in me, and I want to get the fuck out. So you can sort of gauge what's happening and not flee and not try to eject from the relationship. But that primal fear is very, very strong, and it's best to engage with a practitioner around these things, because it takes a very stable, secure person to be with a disorganized person in order to calm their nervous system and create enough trust in them that the disorganized person will calm down. They're like a frightened animal at a very deep primal level. And that makes relationships with disorganized people like relatively more volatile and more difficult to engage with than either an avoidant or an anxious. Although they each have their challenges, and like somebody who's a little bit disorganized versus somebody who's very anxious, that could, for anybody being in a relationship with them, it might be one might be easier than the other depending on their own attachment style. So we'd have to go into the combinations and the ways that the attachment styles work together and sort of interlock together to create volatility versus what they each have to learn from each other. So, but that's a longer conversation that we could geek out on at a different time.
Well, first of all, thank you. That was really, really valuable. And I want to just riff on a couple of things. Let's just drop into compassion, because any of those styles are challenging. They're challenging to be in that place, and they're challenging to be interacting with somebody who's in that place. And so I just want to acknowledge how common it is to then start judging ourselves. If we're disorganized or we're anxious, then we can judge ourselves for being too, easily freaked out. And then if we've got a partner that goes, "What's wrong with you? God, you get so freaked out so easily," right? Then we start going into shame and all of that. So
can I say something about that?
Yeah.
And yes on the compassion. So I think I want to take a breath because I'm feeling a lot of that. I don't notice myself jumping in. For having learned a lot around compassion for somebody who's codependent, if you want to look at it that way. So the first thing I want to say about that is it's so deep. Codependency is so deep that nobody can flip a switch to make it stop. There's just it's possible to get a handle on it from the outside, but it's very difficult to get a handle on it from the inside. So it's always better to realize that the patterns are emerging, and to have compassion for self, compassion for the other person, to realize that wherever they're at, they're doing the best they can. And to tell them what's wrong with you or to react negatively towards that codependency is essentially making it worse. It's not going to help. The kind of support that they need is a grounded nervous system, is a regulated nervous system, and any form of shame or guilt or attack will only make it worse. And that's what I've learned over the years around this.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's exactly right. I also want to just acknowledge that we aren't necessarily always just one of those things. When I was married, we were both pretty securely attached. She'd get a little anxious sometimes. I'd get a little avoidant at times, but we were for the most part securely attached. Then she died. And the next relationship I went into was with somebody who was super independent, free-spirited, and 26 years younger than me. And I started becoming anxious because she was out and wanted to date other people and was, much more out there and wanting to have multiple experiences, which was okay. And I was more ready and used to monogamy and stability. And so I became anxious. And the more I became anxious, the more she became avoidant. And we were even aware of this, but it was still a dynamic. When that relationship ended, I had a fairly brief relationship for about 1.5 years with somebody who was very anxious. And the more anxious she got, the more I became avoidant. And so even though I'm a relationship coach, I know the dynamics, I teach this stuff. I've been on all sides of it recently in my life. I know what it's like to feel anxious. I know what it feels like to be avoidant. And I also know what it feels like to be secure. So, it's not like we're just, it's not like, okay, you were born this day, you're always going to be a Capricorn. Okay. Depending on who we're relating to, because we live on a planet of polarity and the duality of relationship, we can often start playing opposite where that person's at. Trish.
Yeah. So I had this I'd like to share one of my experiences. So after this, I was in this relationship I thought this person was the love of my life. And we were moving into a polyamorous relationship. And what I didn't know, is my connection okay, by the way?
It's
not okay.
It's doable. We can hear you, but it's not ideal, but it's okay.
I'll slow down then. So I was in this relationship and we started moving into something a little bit more that if I was secure and had worked through some of my childhood beliefs and traumas, like it could have been something that would have worked. But I was at this point meshing in a codependent experience. And I would like to say that something that I have learned is that it takes two people to participate, or multiple people in the relationship. It takes the other people to participate and to subscribe to the codependency. It's not just one-sided, right? And so what I learned from this experience, okay, hold on, let me finish the thought. So of course I was very I was very insecure and very much in my victimhood in this particular triangle with this person. And my next experience dating was that I was dating myself from the previous relationship, and it blew my mind to be able to see the other side or the other facet of this experience, where I was like, I was the avoidant one, and this person, just like you, Scott, I was like, oh crap, like this is this experience. And it was an amazing thing to see, because it gave me an opportunity to really understand what I was doing and how I created it. So just to share with everyone some ideas, or some, like, if you wonder if there's some codependent stuff going on in your relationship, it looks like lacking boundaries, rigid and controlling behavior. This is the key piece for me specifically, was choosing or behaving out of obligation. Like that was a key point to my personal abandonment. And that was one of the like keystones to my codependency. Encourages dependence and enabling. There was like a lot of little funky little things. It also lived in the lack of self-esteem, in my dependency, guilt. Like there was a lot of guilt and shame that came up. If that person said, oh, I'm feeling this way, I would be riddled with guilt, because I didn't want to hurt them, and I wanted them to love me so deeply, and I really wanted to just make them feel good. And you see how that started to shift the way that I was like, oh my God, they're not going to love me if I don't behave this way. And that right there is the thing that led me to work with Philippe, and then to work with Scott, is to really to step back and to drop into my body and into myself and be able to live in my truth and also be able to be like compassionate and listen to another person. So although I'll likely deal with these or make friends with my patterning and my attachment style for the rest of my life, there is a way to move through them and like let go of these patterns and these habits.
Mm.
That's, you know, I'll drop back in a little later and share my experience around what that looks like now for me.
Thank you, Trish. Thank you for that, a lot there. I'm going to go to Philippe in a moment because somebody asked a question for him, but I want to just read a couple of the comments that have come in. A lot of people really appreciated Philippe's explanation about attachment style. And going back a little bit to it, when he was talking about when we're little, Bonnie writes, also the foods we eat bring certain chemicals to the brain that affects how we react to actions. That even includes a baby on breastfeeding. Example, mangoes have anacardial acid, which goes to the brain and is a natural antidepressant. Too much cinnamon can cause anxiety. So just to, yeah, what we eat is really important.
I'm allergic to those.
Well, there you go. I want to riff on something Trish said, and then we're going to go to Philippe, because so you can prepare Philippe. Ronit writes that I've danced all the parts, and she wants to hear you geek out about avoidant, anxious relationships. We're going to go there in a minute. But I want to share my definition of codependence. When we cross the line into an unhealthy enmeshment. And I thought of it when I was listening to Trish, because she kind of referenced it, but I want to kind of give the Scott Thomas definition of it. So for me, we cross the line into unhealthy enmeshment, unhealthy codependence, share when we step outside of our personal integrity in order to make the other person happy or to avoid them being unhappy. I'll say it again. We cross the line when we step outside of our personal integrity in order to make that person happy or to avoid them being unhappy. And the last thing is that for that equation to work, we have to know what our personal integrity is in any particular situation. What's our personal integrity around sexuality, polyamory, drug use, alcohol use, honesty, and knowing our integrity and being able to share that with a lover or a partner or a friend. And these, by the way, isn't just for lovers. You know, we get codependent with family members, with roommates, with people we work with. So I want to make it clear, this is not just for a romantic relationship. I don't know what our truth is. And then ideally be able to share our truth with people and not step outside of our truth to avoid unhappiness or to make someone happy. So I wanted to get that in there. I'm now putting the spotlight back on Philippe and asking you to fulfill Ronit's Friday night wish to geek out all about the avoidant and anxious dancer relationship.
So first of all, I wanted to thank you for that definition of codependency, because mine is very close to that. For me, as soon as consent goes out the window, as soon as one person's needs become more important than the other person's needs, then is a form of codependency. But really, it's about consent. Like it's okay to support somebody as long as there's full consent, meaning that both people are ready, willing, and able, and informed that when they make that choice, that it's a fully consensual choice, which is what I associate to what you mean by integrity. So that's my version of it. When things go into the shadows, meaning that it's not fully known, when things are not fully known and not everything is on the table and not everybody's fully consenting to it, then there's a kind of codependency that develops, and it can creep in really slowly. That's not obvious. There's implicit needs that are trying to get met that not everybody knows about, and there's very subtle ways that we can either give love or refuse to give love. And there was that they call it bids for love. I don't know what. There's an institute, I can't remember their name, that talks about that. So
The Gottman
the
Institute.
Gottman Institute, exactly. So in bids for love and how these bids are responded to, whether it's for attention or love or time or affection, in the ways that we respond to that, we're actually saying, I take you, I accept your love, or I don't accept your love, or I want your love, or I don't want your love, and this can all happen really subtly and start to kind of carve ways that the relationship is and is not. And all the way to potentially making the relationship more volatile. And so now we're going to cross over to the anxious avoidant dance, or tango, as I like to call it. And I created an infographic about that, and I'll be posting it hopefully when I have a second after this. And it beautifully explains why it happens, why it doesn't work, and what's the progression of it. But I'll just give you a general sense of it. So you've got an anxious person who is hyper aware, wants to feel special because they need it. And so when I say need it, it really, at the nervous system level, they need somebody to lean on and find balance with. The problem is a secure person, while they can provide that, they don't provide the deeper sense of insecurity, of matching insecurity that happens with an avoidant person. When an anxious person meets an avoidant person, there's this deep recognition, this deep resonance of insecurity. So the anxious says, wow, you're my soulmate. I feel nervous. I feel excited. And that's because at a primal level, there's a fear that's present that matches the fear of the other person. And they start talking to each other before words are even uttered. So that's the first piece. Now, the second piece is the anxious person wants to feel special, wants the attention. And the avoidant person, on the other hand, doesn't dole it out so easily. So when they decide to actually respond positively to an anxious person, it makes the anxious person feel special, feel loved, feel wanted. And they, at a primal level, they understand that this special that the avoidant person is doling out is very rare, very difficult to come by for in terms of this kind of interaction. The avoidants are very picky. They don't do drama. They don't want drama because it's just too much energy and emotional emotional energy that they don't have a lot of. So when they give it out in small spurts because they don't have a whole lot to give. And for the anxious person, it feels like the most special thing in the world. And conversely, the anxious person is so excited, so loving, so doting, so beautifully vivid in their love and passionate in their love that it awakens the avoidant person's attachment style. And sometimes the avoidant person's attachment style will awaken enough to actually attach back. That's a jackpot, because at that point, the anxious person feels like this love is real, and the avoidant person might even feel in love as a response. And that's happened to me, and it was very surprising to me. So that being in love, and which essentially means at a primal level and biological level and chemical level, that you become addicted to each other. And that addiction is great until things start to go south. And what happens is that the anxious person's love is never enough. They're never fully fulfilled by this love. They always want more. And so they're always asking for more. And as a result, the avoidant person tries to give more until they're sucked dry, because their nervous system is not able to handle that much emotionality. Eventually they run out, and they start to feel engulfed and overwhelmed by the anxious person. And so they run away. At that point, the anxious person freaks out, their nervous system is out, their sense of being abandoned is in goes up in full force, and they're essentially feel abandoned, which is what they're most afraid of. And the avoidant person, whose greatest fear was to be overwhelmed and engulfed, also is having that same experience. So they're separate for a while. And after a while, the avoidant person calms down because they're by themselves, because they need auto-regulation. They need to be by themselves to regulate themselves because of their attachment coping mechanisms. And eventually they come back because they feel better, and they find the anxious person completely distraught and in a really bad place. And they come back and they say, I can take care of you now because I feel okay. and they start to dance again. So that's the general idea. And it comes from a sense of addiction towards the other person for different reasons, because they have a different type of engagement. The anxious person wants more. The avoidant person can handle a certain amount until it's too much, and then they run away. And so that kind of tension creates a lot of fireworks at first until it creates a lot of harm. And that's the difficulty of the tango of anxious and avoidant.
We twinkle when people do things that we appreciate, so we're twinkling for that. Thank you. You know, and again, so it's the answer: slowing down, becoming conscious, and noticing what's my patterned reaction on any of these things. What's my patterned reaction? What's my habitual way of dealing with this? And how can I slow down and not just be habitual or reactive or continuing a pattern, but to really kind of come into a different way of being. And that's where we have to slow down, give each other a lot of self-empathy, have empathy for others, and do things differently. And that takes consciousness. It takes, you know, that's why it's good to work with coaches. That's why it's good to always slow down. And I think one thing I want to add, I think everybody has mentioned at one time or another, the addiction or the addictive quality of when we're in a relationship that maybe or is codependent and meshed. We've become compulsive. How many, when is he going to text me back? Oh my God, he only sent me one emoji. I sent 3 hearts. He only sent 1 heart. You know, it's like we start getting like really compulsive, looking for evidence to prove either that this person really loves me, or as Philippe talked about, if someone's been really harmed, and I've experienced this both personally and very much as a coach, watching people that have a history of a family member or a lover hurting them, that there's a deep belief it's only a matter of time before you hurt me. And so they start then collecting evidence to prove that, yes, you're hurting me, even when actually that's not what's going on. So it's, you know, it's complex. I want to read one comment and then we'll go back to Trish. Annette, who's in our Zoom room, shared something very interesting. She talked about, I was adopted. So I feel like I've learned attachment behaviors and coping defenses from 2 sets of parents and foster parents. I don't really remember what happened before 5 years old, but I'm sure there was love and hurt happening. So there's confusion about what healthy love really is. I do adapt myself to what kind of relationship I'm in. I change myself to meet the person's expectations. I have been all 3 attachments. My main issue is I feel unwanted, probably from losing my biological family parents. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to open it up to either Trish or Philippe, if either of you want to comment on that or go in another direction.
Definitely. I'm really resonating with what she said. Is, you know, I think that, you know, okay, we understand how to relate to other people between the ages of 0 to 6. Like, we're creating the way that we interact, the way that we behave. We're literally learning how to enmesh with other people. And that's really what it looks like. When we're about 7 is when we start to develop our personality and our identity and ego. And so before that, we're literally being taught and trained to take on these roles, either for our parents or for ourselves, right? So, you know, she's like, before, when you're 5 years old, I'm sure there was love and hurt happening. And absolutely. So my mom, at this point, I understand her to be particularly codependent. She participated in this pretty much gender role that she was also taught. And she was an anxious attacher. She was very insecure. She needed my attention. She needed my validation. Now, my father, completely avoidant. Like, he never shared emotion. And so to be able to figure out how to get my needs met was a place where I really struggled with. Like, how do I move here and get my needs met for my father? And how do I move over here and get my autonomy with my mother? And it's such it was a struggle for me as a person who didn't understand how to give myself self-empathy, how to give myself, clear, compassionate understanding to take care of my own needs, to self-source, and to show up with my boundaries. Like, I didn't even know that I could have boundaries with any of these people, because I didn't, it's not like we're taught that in high school or grade school. Nobody talks about this, especially if you grew up in Montana, in like a tiny little town, and like, Montana hood would be like redneck nowhere. Right? And so nobody talks about that. I didn't know this until I got to California, and all these conscious people are like, oh my God, this is what's happening. So I'm really resonating with you, Bonnie. Like, it really is, like, once you start to become aware of your own patterning, your own habituation for or towards a behavior or thought process, there's ways through therapy and coaching. This is why I have these two beautiful men in my corner, because they're safe men for multiple reasons, because I've created them that way in my brain. And they show up and teach me really amazing tools of self-compassion and help me hold my own boundaries, right? And that's really important. But they've also taught me how to find my own truth and stand for my belief. And that is incredibly helpful. And I don't know if I could have found those things by myself. I don't think that, maybe I could have through, like 50, 60 self-help books, but I really needed some reflection from the outside, some compassionate, loving, direct conversation. Being like, hey, you might want to look at that. Oh, that? Ooh, give me like 2 months to look at that. Right, Philippe? He was so sweet.
Thank you, Trish. And I'm glad that you got both your coaches with you tonight. We're going to hear from another love coach who just joined us, Camila, in a couple of minutes. But I want to read some of the comments that have come in from our audience. So first of all, Bonnie writes about the importance of Feldenkrais and NLP study, and all about how we hold memories in our muscles and then react to actions. And this is a big part of what we work with people in love coaching. I was working with a woman yesterday who had a father that was very predatory and sexually was very inappropriate with her when she was 5, 6 years old. And so we're working on learning why her body reacts certain ways. She's now in her 20s, and her lover is 15 years older, and her lover's a sweetheart. He's a very safe, sweet guy. But there's times that all of a sudden, he's not her safe, sweet lover. In her experience, she gets re-stimulated, and she just wants to be, he wants to, be as far away from me as possible. And it shows up in her body first. And so we've been working on that. And so it is really important to recognize that our body is what informs us. Our body is where we carry so many of these memories and so many of these experiences, especially it's where we carry trauma, and learning which parts of your body you carry which parts of your trauma, and learning how to work with that. So thank you, Bonnie, for bringing that up. A couple more comments. Renate wrote down our definitions of codependence. And Mariko writes something that I think I'd like for Philippe just to address, and then we'll go to Camila. Mariko, who's also part of Love Coach Academy, writes, I just made a video about all of this stuff. Felipe Lewis, I think I'm disorganized a little because of emotionally unavailable parents, but you make disorganized sound so bad. So I just want to give Felipe a chance to address that for a moment.
What comes up for me about bad is that what I'm trying to get to when I'm trying to explain what's happening is not, it's not a moral judgment. It's that there's a way that the nervous system has received a template that creates difficulty in engaging with reality or emotionally with reality as it comes at us. I mean, I remember the first time somebody told me about avoidance, because that's where I lean. And my first reaction was, oh, that sounds really bad. I don't want to be avoidant. I want to be secure. And the reality is just that these patterns emerge. Maybe my definition applies to you, maybe it doesn't. And the important bit is whether you notice the patterns that emerge that makes it more difficult, that shows that it's more difficult for you to engage in some situations than others. What it sounds like is entirely, you can throw that out the window. There's no real need to have a moral judgment on what I say. And I understand it doesn't sound good when you start to look at patterns where you or I or anybody else get yourself in trouble because you or I or anybody else is not fully a choice when reality happens. And what I've learned over the years and doing this work heavily on myself and on my clients is that the path towards becoming more secure is essentially the path of being able to roll consensually with everything that happens. So disorganized in a large way came up because it was difficult as a template, comes up because it was difficult to know how to handle parents and their behavior. So somebody who has a disorganized attachment style, which is not a condemnation of behavior or reaction. It's just a place to be and understand that the nervous system has a lot of ways to engage with reality and doesn't always know the best way to do it. And so when you have a parent that's very volatile, you have to be ready for everything. The problem is that this kind of template stays inside the nervous system for a long time, even after the parents are gone. And so in trying to understand for the nervous system at a primal level, to try to understand what's happening out there, it's not able to make sense of it quite as easily. And when I try to describe it, it sounds bad, but that's the reality of how the nervous system is trying to engage. And once, as a person, you understand how your own particular template engages with reality, you can start to move from there into starting to modify that template into something that's more secure for the purpose of being able to enjoy life just a little bit better and a little bit more easily. So ultimately, when I'm engaging with my clients, just like as I was engaging with Trish, being codependent or being anxious or having a difficult time to engage with events in her life, or finding the partners that would cause her to engage even more codependently. There was never a judgment. There was never a sense of good or bad. It was always, oh, this is what's going on. Now we have a starting point. This is where you're on the map of attachment style. This is where you are in the landscape of codependency. Okay, now we know where we are on the map. There's nothing right or wrong about it. It's just where you're on the map. And then we can work from there, because now we have a sense of using a map. We know where we can go from there. So that's the best I can say about right or wrong about attachment.
Beautiful. That was really beautifully done. Thank you. So we're going to go to Camila, and I give you all a couple questions that have come in that we'll address after we hear from Camila. Leela writes, how do we move from disorganized into secure? Suggestions, examples, so we'll go there. And Mariko asks, how about chronically single people? Can they be secure? So there are a couple of questions we'll get to, but we have a special surprise. Camila, one of our love coaches, is here. So hi, Camila.
Hello, Scott, Trish, Philippe. Nice to see all of you. Yeah.
Wherever you want to go, where do you want to go? You can answer one of those questions I just asked, or wherever you'd like to go.
I'm going to pose a question for Philippe.
Okay.
So I'm in the midst of doing a lot of my own codependency work and getting into some stuff that I've never encountered despite 20 plus years of really deep healing work. And I'm finally doing some trauma work from 0 to 6 months old for me, and seeing elements of coming into my family of origin as a second child, and sister was already the focus, and it's a very different experience, first child and second child. And I'm learning different elements of how that relates to many different forms of codependency that I've had in relationships. So I would say most predominantly I've been the rescuer, and I have attracted addicts on the other side. That's been a looping pattern that I have gotten more and more conscious relationships as time progresses, but it's like, repeated patterns for sure that I'm now finally unraveling. So the whole addiction piece of relationship is of big interest to me. And I understand this whole biochemical network of our addiction to love, to that person. The oxytocin that's emitted in sex is very extreme. It is the same level of oxytocin as a mother when she's breastfeeding. So these bonding hormones are intense. So my question is, knowing all of that, is there love without addiction? What does it look like to be having these oxytocin and other hormones running through us in love? And is there a formula that is not addiction, or is it that addiction is part of it and we manage it in healthier and healthier ways?
Absolutely. Yes. So the last thing you said, I think, is absolutely right on the money. It's, of course, my opinion, and I've done some, I've done some research around this, not official sort of clinical research, but in my research, what they've been finding is that the engagement of attachment is a form of addiction. Like for a child and a mother to, at a primal level. So let's go back a few million years. We're mammals, because this is mammalian stuff, right? Yeah. This is primal. So this is stuff that sits underneath the neocortex. The mammalian attachment is an engagement at the mammalian brain level, and even lower than that, potentially. So for a baby animal to stay with the mother animal, there has to be something that keeps them together. It's not some version of I love you and I want to be with you for as long as you need me. There's no thought like that. So for that to happen, there has to be something that's at a lower operating system level. Mm-hmm. And it looks like the mother and the child and the mother, the baby and the mother, experience good feelings, oxytocin, which has been around for millions of years. I don't know how many, but it goes way far. And they experience good feelings when they're together. So when they go away from each other, not too long from that moment, they're like, wait, I'm not feeling that good feeling anymore. I gotta go look for that good feeling, right? And so they look for each other. And it's just so happens that the mother experiences more oxytocin than the father, than the male. And so they're more likely to go look for their baby, and the baby is more likely to look for their mother. And then later on in life, the male actually experiences less, so they can actually go away from the babies and from the rest of the family in order to look for food and other things. So that's one version of why it's possible that this bond exists. Now, we're ultimately animals first, humans second. We've been animals way longer than we've been humans with the next layer of our brain. And so all this stuff happens at a very low level, and it drives us and it moves us. And the next layer of our brain just simply allows us to engage with those needs in a more sophisticated way. But essentially, it's the same need: the need for closeness, the need for love, the needs for emotional balancing and co-regulation. These things are all baked in to our lower levels of our brains. And we're sort of interpreting these needs in more sophisticated ways. So my understanding is that attachment is a form of addiction, and a healthy attachment is one that doesn't involve insecurity. Now, at the same time, the way our brain is adaptive and develops these coping mechanisms really early on, before the brain is fully developed, before the baby is adaptively trying to figure out how to best survive, that's also a natural occurrence. And the coping mechanisms, even when they're unhealthy, at least the way we can declare them objectively, they're still natural. They're still adaptive in the most evolutionary and natural way. But that's because our brains, as they stand, they were meant to help us survive thousands of years ago. Like right now, we live in a world where essentially our brains are not adapted to it, not evolutionarily, not biologically, evolutionarily. Like our brains are still the same brains that we had thousands and thousands of years ago, before technology and before developing weapons and tools and things like that. So that kind of addiction is meant to keep us together and make it really hard to separate. In fact, they've looked at the brain and during a breakup, and apparently it looks the same as when you're physically harmed. So that kind of addiction is really powerful. So it's very difficult to break it up, and it's very adaptive too. Like not wanting to easily separate and getting addicted in that way supports having to work things out and staying together as societies and as couples in order to support raising children. Even though at this point in the game, we're like, less children is better, but thousands of years ago, more children was a good thing because it would keep the species alive. So that's just the basic idea around addiction. We see addiction as a bad thing, but addiction is an adaptive quality. It supports getting the things that feel good because generally that's more adaptive than not. Now, of course, there's things like drugs, which we've developed, but in terms of being in nature, trying to survive, which is what our bodies are meant to do at the moment, addictive qualities are just driving us towards the things that are better for us and away from the things, in other ways, away from the things that are not good for us. So oxytocin, dopamine, cortisol, and serotonin are all meant to support, to send messages down our inside of our body in order to support us in our survival. That's a long-winded answer to your short question. But essentially it means that adaptively and primarily you're doing the right thing, but you also know better because you've evolved an extra layer of brain.
Mm-hmm. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's all take a breath. Thank
Get
you.
excited.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful, beautiful. Mariko wrote a couple more things, which I'd love for us to respond to. She writes, my theory is that it all has a lot to do with how deeply the yoni has been penetrated, that it triggers your attachment pattern right away, 0 to 10. She also writes, I had something called attachment trauma that I had to heal. I used to get extremely sad when people liked me, then dropped me suddenly, but I was attracting those types of avoidant attachers. And I'll address that for a moment and then turn over to Trish. I can see Trish light up there. We do tend to attract that which we fear. And we tend to attract that which we believe is what we're going to experience. And that's why it's so difficult, because oftentimes when we're little, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, that's when we're kind of figuring out, where are we? What is this planet? What is this world I'm in? And how does the world relate to me? And little kids at that age are extremely egocentric. They perceive that everything happening around them is because of them. And then we make these decisions about the world based upon our experiences with a very limited perspective. And so if we have an unnatural childhood, a mother that instead of nurturing us is angry or hurtful or avoidant, we take it personally and we think, oh, there's something wrong with me. And that's why mommy treats me that way. If we have a father in nature provides safety, but if we have a father that's not safe, or there's an absent father, again, it becomes very confusing, and we make certain decisions about who we are, how the world treats us. And oftentimes, if we haven't done enough therapy or understanding, that's just what happened to us when we were little, or that's what happened to us with our first love affair, or our first boyfriend, girlfriend. If we can recognize that we had unfortunate histories, but that doesn't necessarily need to be who we are or how the world is always going to treat us. But again, that requires a certain amount of support, work, new experiences. So last thing I want to say, and then turn over to Trish, is that often we will magnetize those experiences that we know. If we know being abandoned, we'll attract someone who's avoidant or likely to not stick around. We tend to attract what we know. Even if it's uncomfortable, at least it's familiar, especially if what we're attracting is unconscious. So my little thoughts there, and turn over to my partner, Trish.
I want to touch on addiction for a moment and how I've been seeing it lately. Addiction is basically habituation, that we run a pattern of chemicals through our brain so many times that now we have a neural pathway that's easily accessible. And that could be whatever it is. Like it could be happiness, it could be joy, it could be anger, it could be sadness. And you know, as someone who's worked at a heroin detox center, like I had to really understand what that looked like. And it really is, the chemistry in our brain will literally repeat the same feeling or go towards that experience that many times. It'll just keep going. Like that's the crazy thing about being a human, is that you can be consciously aware that this is unhealthy and still have to recreate the habit, which takes 3 weeks to 45 days to actually start creating a new cycle. So I often think in my new understanding of whether like codependency and attachment styles is that it is basically drug addiction. Like whether you're putting Coca-Cola in your mouth or caffeine or alcohol or drugs, or just running a secular thought process or a secular type of relationship. And so that right there, if you keep, for me as a child, there were these things where I would choose the same relationship with my father in my relationships, like years down the road, in my 20s and my 30s even. And I'm like, oh, and that's the piece where when you start becoming conscious and aware of it, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm literally a child. This is my child brain recreating this experience again. And it actually takes you choosing to create a new emotional habit. And that's the crazy part about it, is that it takes conscious choice, right? It takes pure want and desire and an understanding of oneself and deeper compassion for yourself. It takes you knowing why you behave in that way and choosing to step forward in a different way. I wanted to, can you find the question? There was a question before Camila's question. Do you know the one that I'm talking about? Like there was two there that.
Well, there's Mariko talking about the yoni being penetrated, that question.
Oh,
ongoingly single.
Or is there love without addiction?
Oh, love without addiction. Well, that kind of covers that emotional piece.
Or can people who are constantly single be secure? Is that the question you're thinking of? Be securely attached?
So there is this idea that ultra independence, I was just reading about this ultra independence place. You can't hear me. That there's a term called ultra independence, or when someone's like, I am so this way that nothing can penetrate my vulnerability. And it's this way that becomes an avoidance, I think. And I'm sure that Philippe has some ideas about this, that it's this avoidance of true vulnerability, which is the gateway to intimacy. If I'm constantly single and I'm not letting anyone in, either, this is how I see it, either I'm too afraid to be vulnerable and to really allow myself to be seen. I'm not actually wanting to look at the places that are still sensitive and to share, or, like it comes from a place of fear is what I'm thinking. And there is a place, like human beings, if you want to belong in community, there's some dance that has to be. So I could be really stubborn and be like, Scott, Tori, Camila, Philippe, like, I'm not budging on anything. But that's not really helpful. Like you can't, take out the trash and do dinner and, take care of my emotional needs and all of these things unless I'm doing them myself and able to meet you at least some halfway somewhere, right? And so finding those places of not necessarily abandoning yourself to meet that person, but to be able to meet them in your core, in your truth, and not take it on.
I have some thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm full of opinions. That's all I said. That's what I tell my clients. I'm full of opinions. Take them or throw them out the window. Because I'm not attached. I mean, this is stuff that I geek out on, and it's such a joy to be doing this with all of you in a public forum. So when I think of, is somebody who's always single? Can somebody who's always single be secure? I think that was the question, right? Okay, hopefully that's what it was. And the way I look at this is what does a secure person naturally do? Now, we're not talking about all secure people. We're just kind of generalizing about secure. So what I've kind of teased out of the secure attachment style, the secure behavior, which is sort of like the opposite of codependent. Okay, so a secure person is just naturally attaches. They because it's the most adaptive thing to do. They naturally want to connect. They naturally go deep. They naturally communicate. They naturally find ways to attach to people because attaching is a good thing. Being interdependent is a good thing because it's better to do things together. We're always stronger together, which doesn't mean that a secure person can't be alone, can't meet their own needs. But there's always an interdependence between meeting your own needs and meeting the needs of somebody else. It's always more rich to do this with somebody else because there are things that you don't know how to do them. You don't know how to engage with them, and to be in deep connection with somebody else, to be in deep intimacy with somebody else means that you get to experience more life. You get to experience more of life because now you're with somebody who can support you. And that is sort of why we're social creatures, because together we get to learn from each other and we get to specialize in areas where even in relationships, there's a specialization. Somebody likes to make food more, somebody likes to fix things more, somebody likes to go shopping more. And so in these ways, we find balances, but we also find how to be stronger together and get more out of life together. So I think being secure means more naturally attaching to others in a healthy way, which means in a way that's more interdependent rather than codependent, which means to me that there's full choice in all levels, or as much as possible. Whenever there's a lack of choice, there's an exploration around, hey, what's going on? Like, why, you asked me a question, you made a request to me, and I don't feel like I can say no. And what does that mean about you? And in that process, there's also a sense of growing into better versions of ourselves. And that, to me, that looks like some version of shadow integration, sort of kind of putting more things that used to be in our blind spot and putting them on the table, things that we didn't understand, things that were immature, that were insecure, or that we were unaware of, and beginning to understand those things better. It's hard to do this alone. It's much easier to do this with others, including a deep, intimate partner.
Beautiful. Absolutely true. Absolutely. As we're winding down, we've got about 10 minutes left. So we're going to kind of go a little bit more into solutions. And certainly, I think we've heard a few times mentioned now the value of presence. And just reading a couple of things for people. Annette writes, being present to myself and others as I meet them halfway without fixing or changing, really just by being very, very present. So
beautiful.
Absolutely. And Leela writes down all about the value of shadow integration. I did take what Philippe put a couple of links into the Zoom chat box, and I've copied them and put them into my watch party and into the Love Coach Academy group and page. And I want to thank all the people that have been sharing this. A lot of people are sharing this conversation out over Facebook. So thank you to Rachel and to Leela and those of you who are sharing it. I want to share something. which is earlier you saw the classic victim triangle. I want to acknowledge Emily Orem, who I partnered with for many years. And when we taught this, we came up with the alternative. Because one way of looking at this is we want to go from being codependent to interdependent. Interdependent, because we do impact each other. We are in a dance with each other. And so we want to go from victim thinking to victor thinking. I am empowered. Really, so if you find yourself in the victim way of thinking, what do you need to actually truly perceive yourself as being empowered? And for the rescuer, not to be focused on the other person, but to be focused on yourself. I love and honor myself fully. We shift our attention to that need to rescue, that, part of us, that my job is to take care of the other person or to fix them. I have to start by loving and honoring myself fully. And then when we're in the perpetrator role, where we are judging someone, and anytime that we perceive that the other person is bad or stupid or wrong or less than us in any way, we are in perpetrator consciousness. So we change that by becoming the peaceful warrior. I am compassion in action. So this is a wonderful kind of alternative way to manage this. And Trish and I are going to do a longer webinar on some of these dynamics. We haven't figured out the date and the time, but probably sometime in October. And I want to take a moment, Philippe, definitely give us your website. If you can pop that into the chat box, and I'm going to bring it up and show it to people. And we'll do kind of one last round of everybody offering final thoughts. Trish, what would you like to share as kind of your final thoughts tonight?
Well, in my work and in the coaching that I offer, I just want to offer one easy kind of thing, a thought to think about, to move from codependent places and really drop in and call into yourself. And the questions, there's two. The question that I'm referring to is, when you're in a place and you're up against a question that someone's requesting of you, a request, for what reason am I making this decision? And if I were the only person on earth, would I still want to do this? And those two can really give you a lot of clarity about what your wants and needs are, and really where you can show up more for yourself and meet that other person in their truth as well, without taking it on. So I just want to leave you with that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Trish. I'm going to go to Philippe last. Camila, first of all, thank you for joining us. And I want to acknowledge that you are now doing a Love Coach Academy show Thursdays at 3 o'clock Pacific time.
Thank you. Universal Heart Wisdom.
I'm looking forward to watching you come onto that show now. My dog is excited also.
Thanks. Dog's my favorite viewer. So my parting thoughts would be for folks who are feeling themselves in some of the things we're talking about. It's really worth it to work with a therapist or a coach who has studied attachment theory, someone like Philippe. I have been doing that kind of work with someone who really specializes in attachment theory. And this is a gold mine for really understanding your relationship patterns and undoing the unhealthy patterns and creating the healthy patterns. So highly recommend working with someone who has studied attachment theory deeply.
Yeah, I want to second what Camila said. There's something really powerful about having a framework to understand patterns that are sort of getting in the way from living a full and happy life. That sounds cheesy when it comes out of my mouth, but the reality is you only got one life, and it's easy. Sometimes things start out in our life very, very difficult, and then we have to sort of make our way back from that. But there's also something really powerful and really beautiful about making your way back and learning a ton of really beautiful truth and wisdom that you can then share with people in your life, either by becoming a practitioner or a coach, or doing work that supports people, that allows you to give back. And quickly, I want to speak, because I just posted my website, and it's exquisitedark.love. And not that many people think about what does it mean to have dark love. What is dark love? And so for me, the idea of dark work or dark love is looking at what's messy in your life and digging into that and understanding it better, so that you can kind of draw out the lessons and the wisdom that comes from it. And what it means is that even if your life, when you look at it back, you look back on it, it might look like things were really bad. But the reality is that when you recover from that and learn from that and get all the treasure from that hero's journey that you've been on, or the multiple hero's journey that you've been on, some beautiful gifts emerge. There's a way that I've seen all the people in my life who've had very difficult childhoods and trauma and abuse have come back and become real badasses, and can really show the way to those people who are just coming to terms with these patterns and these difficulties that have happened to them way long ago, and they're like, wow, it seems like this is going to last forever. And no, it doesn't last forever. But it starts by becoming aware of those patterns. So and I've posted the journey to secure, which starts with unaware and secure, where your life is a mess and you don't know what's going on, and you're getting into weird relationships that are harmful. And then eventually you're like, wow, I'm starting to recognize these patterns. You become aware, you become insecure, you're still insecure, but become more aware of what's going on. So that's the second stage. And as you become aware of those insecure patterns, you start to be able to kind of like tweak them and modify them and change your trajectory a little bit into becoming aware and secure, or secure aware. And that journey is a long one, because you have to notice these patterns, you have to try to do something different, you catch yourself a little bit faster, and at some point you sort of catch yourself in the moment as it happens, and eventually you sort of see it coming from 10 minutes away or 3 feet away, and then eventually it's a mile away, and then eventually it's 10 miles away. So then you just change your trajectory. You become more able to change your trajectory and do things that are more secure. And then eventually, if you do this for a long time, like at least 3 to 5 years, if not your whole life, eventually that kind of all blends into your life, because you've learned the patterns, the secure patterns that create more security, that surrounds you with secure people that are all there to help you maintain that more secure, more interdependent life. And eventually you kind of forget about it, but every once in a while something pops up, and then you realize, oh wow, I've learned a lot, and I can roll with this again, because I've seen it happen and I see it again, and every time I manage to make it work. So that's the basic idea of learning to become more secure, less codependent, less enmeshed, because it's just not necessary anymore. So that's dark work. Dark work is you start with messy, and you kind of make good things with it, and you compost it, and it becomes the source of your power.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. I'm going to go back to his website if you want to learn more about Philippe. Go to exquisitedark.love. Exquisitedark.love. And one of the things he's got on his website is this beautiful journey to secure attachment. So here are the steps that he kind of lays out, and I strongly encourage you, looking for coaching in this department, to look towards Philippe. He's brilliant. So thank you for being on the show with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And thank you everybody for watching. We've had a lot of questions, a lot of people coming in. Mariko had some other things that came in that we didn't have time to get to tonight. But we're going to be doing a lot of relationship stuff on this show over the next month. So this is going to be like, October's going to be relationship month for Straight Talk. So I want to encourage everybody to join us next Friday night. And also, for those of you who are into Saturday Night Alive, I host a wonderful show every Saturday night called Saturday Night Alive for the Global Peace Tribe. Mark Sims is coming back tomorrow. And he's amazing. And the whole show tomorrow night is all about who we truly are, going back all the way to our origins. And we've got some of the leading experts in UFO and extraterrestrial understanding joining us. We also have some great musicians. So it's, as always, it's a combination of inspirational speakers, music. We even have magic and comedy happening tomorrow. We also have James Redfield, who some of you may remember. He's a best-selling author. So definitely join us tomorrow night, 6 o'clock Pacific time. Thanks again, Philippe. It was great having you. Trish, my partner in this show. Camila, watch Camila's new show on Love Coach Academy, Thursdays at 3 o'clock. And we look forward to seeing all of you again. Thanks for watching. God bless you. Have a beautiful weekend. Good night.
Thank you so much.